Hello, everyone, and welcome to WIT Presents. I'm Kimberly Winkle, the WIT Committee Chairperson. Before we get started with today's programming, I want to mention a few upcoming events. If you're a maker, I encourage you to consider applying for the AAW Members Juried Exhibition entitled Beginnings. And another opportunity is Nature's Canvas, an AAW exhibition in partnership with the Studio Art Quilts Associates. And please don't forget to register for the upcoming AAW Symposium, which will take place June 13th through 15th in St. Paul, Minnesota. WIT Presents is a program for artists to share their work and inspiration with our attendees. It's not a demonstration. Instead, it's our hope that by seeing each of the presenting artists' work and hearing her story, you will come away inspired. A reminder that this is a webinar format, and there's a couple of icons at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A for your questions and the chat for communicating with other attendees. And lastly, we request that you take a few minutes at the end of the presentation to complete a short survey and consider making a donation to help support WIT programs, including today's free WIT Presents program. Thanks to the WIT Committee, especially Tib Shaw, who works behind the scenes for making WIT Presents possible. And thank you for attending WIT Presents. WIT is thrilled to feature maker Rabea Gebler. Originally from Germany, Rabea lives in Japan, where she studied traditional lacquerware techniques and now practices. I work with materials to highlight their natural beauty, blending traditional and modern techniques, she says. Rabea graduated from Ishikawa Prefectural Institute in Yamanaka lacquerware. She has exhibited her work in Japan and won the 2023 Setsuko Yamada Prize at the Ishikawa International Urushi exhibition. She's an invited artist in the 2025 AAW Pop exhibition and auction entitled Open Closed. Thank you to Rabea for being today's esteemed presenter. We're so thrilled to have you with us today. So let's get started.
Thanks a lot for having me today. Huge thanks to Kimberly Winkle and Tip Shaw for inviting me to be on this. I think it's time for me to share my presentation. Let's see. Second. There we go. Good morning to anyone who's on my side of the planet. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey to woodturning and my journey to Japan. How I came into woodturning, especially Japanese woodturning, and just a little bit of what I was doing before, how I ended up in craft it all, and how it all started. I think I'll just quickly have to mention some parts about my childhood. I definitely grew up in a very traveling family. We were traveling all over the world. My father had a job that allowed him to internationally not work, but have meetings all over the planet. So we were often going with him. My parents met learning Arabic in Damascus. My name is actually Arabic because of like their background. I grew up as a baby being brought to various places. These are just a few examples. I think I've not counted, but I've definitely been to over 40 countries, many of which I don't remember. There's a lot of funny moments where I will say, "Oh, mom, I'm going to this country. Like, I'm really excited to go for the first time." And she will tell me, "Oh, you've actually been when you were 4 years old." So I definitely grew up in various cultures, really confident in other places, learning English really quickly. So I'm often asked if I don't get homesick living in Japan, living on the other side of the planet. And I've never had that feeling. So it's kind of just to explain that I grew up really confident, yeah, traveling the world, living in other places. The picture in the very bottom is me at 14 I decided on my own to do a student high school exchange in Jaipur in India. So I actually went to high school for a whole year in India, which now sounds crazy to me. But so this is kind of explaining why other cultures fascinate me so much and why I feel really confident in traveling and living somewhere outside of my comfort zone, I guess. Next, I might want to mention that I definitely didn't grow up around craft. I watched a lot of the other presentations, and a lot of people either had grandpa's sheds that they were watching their like family in doing carpentry or kind of grew up around that. And I really didn't. I didn't have anyone in my family actually involved in craft, but I did grow up as a pretty creative kid. I was painting and sketching a lot. These are just a couple of the things I could find that I did, not exactly my best works. Um, but I always had a very colorful mind. I was always inventing a lot of games. I would sketch on anything. My mother had a stationery shop. I would design her shop front windows. Um, I was always really creative in that sense, but I didn't make anything. I didn't know how to really use a hammer or a drill. So it was never about physical objects because I just never had contact with that. My brother was the one that was building little airplanes and drones, and I was the one scribbling away. So when it came to think about what I wanted to study in university, I think it was always obvious I was going to do something creative, but I didn't quite know which direction to go. And I believe a lot of my family thought I was going to go into art and I was going to either study painting or fine arts, but I didn't see myself doing that. I have this memory of my aunt, who was an artist, asking me why I didn't want to study art. And I told her, I think I must have been like 13, 14. I told her that I don't have enough problems with the world to be an artist. And I still feel that way. Like I never had something to express with my paintings. I just painted what I saw. I like to just arrange colors that felt nice, or I did a lot of portraits, a lot of like live painting. I just enjoyed sketching things the way I saw them, but I didn't really have a message to convey in the things I did. So the next logical thing to me was to go into design school. I wanted to go into product design. I'm not sure I had a very good, clear understanding of product design before I started. I probably thought of designing chairs and tables and lampshades, and I really like Bauhaus design, so that was kind of my idea of designing objects, but I wasn't really sure that it also means any product around us, and especially a lot of technical products. Everything around us is designed, fridges, appliances, they're all being designed by a product designer. So going into university, I actually got quite frustrated with the studies really quickly. I liked the creative aspect of it, but especially the uni that I went to, that I chose, is very technical and they're really closely working with the industry. So in the area, there was big companies like Bosch, Kircher, Festool. So we were pretty much taught to come up with products for these markets. And while I think there is very good product design, there is people designing objects that are really useful, that do solve problems, and in the way that they're really like nice to use for the customer. Most of what we did was create products that sold. So it was just about coming up with a concept, creating a problem that maybe no one really has, but that sounded logical to people, to then sell them a product to solve that problem. And I got really annoyed with this really quickly. I was close to quitting university and run away to Vienna and study psychology. I didn't, I stayed, decided to finish my studies. And then let's talk about this first. During my internship time, we all have to go into an internship. I decided to change course a little bit and go into an architecture office and not a design office. And I thought maybe that by designing rooms and designing specifically exhibitions, so the place I went to, they designed exhibitions for big museums. by designing experiences like that, I would be a bit closer to the person and I would have it felt more intuitive to me and a bit more like what I wanted to do, choosing the right materials, the right colors, creating like, yeah, an experience, a room that conveys a message, if it's even just like information or just a good feeling. And I really enjoyed my time there. I had a great time. This was one of the projects I was very excited to work on because I was able to be there from start to finish, that this was finalized. So this was an Airstream trailer that we did the whole interior for Dr. Hauschka, like known German beauty brands that uses natural materials. And we got to start from the concept all the way to the finalization of like what materials were to be used, what screws, what colors, what chairs, the carpet, all of these things we got to design, which was great. I really liked the work, but the actual daily work was still sitting in front of a computer, moving pixels around. And I remember we went to the carpentry that ended up building this Airstream that did the interior for this. And I was fascinated. They had showrooms there that they were building at the moment for Rolex, I believe, in Switzerland, and like Cartier and the most amazing things. And I told my boss at the time that I wanted to do this. I wanted to learn how to build these showrooms. And he told me that he understood that I wanted to be there and like be closer to the material, but he would highly advise me against it because there's no money in that and it's not very welcoming for women. And he was right. That carpentry that we were visiting, I think they had about 30 employees. There was not a single woman working there. They didn't even have a women's bathroom. So I was kind of like, okay, I guess he has a point. But I remember standing there and thinking, this looks great. This is what I want to do. Around the same time, I stumbled upon spoon carving, funnily at a music festival out of all places. There was a creative tent and they had a spoon carving workshop, and I joined in. Looking back, it was not a very good workshop. They asked me to just find a branch somewhere at the festival. We like clamped the branch to the table and filed away at it. We used a straight chisel to hollow out the round part of the spoon. But it really did something to me. There was this feeling that I've never had in my life before. I think a lot of people maybe go through this in childhood, but there was this sensation of I used a tool to create something with my bare hands from start to finish. So designing, I'd always created things, but there was always a disconnection between what I was coming up with and the final piece. So either I would design it on a computer and then 3D print it, and maybe I would go back to it and I would sand and paint the 3D print, but I didn't make the actual thing, or I would do a prototype. So I would use styrofoam to make something that was supposed to be from wood. So there was always a disconnect between the actual designing and the creation of the product. But making the spoon was this fundamental feeling of I created this from start to finish. That was so satisfying to me that I got really excited about it. The spoon that I made at the festival, I lost instantly at the festival. But as soon as I got home, I bought some chisels, straight chisels again, because I didn't know what I was doing. And I made these two spoons. I think this must be number 2 and 3. And I got really into it. So in my free time, during my internship and during my studies later, I was carving spoons. Like it was my only hobby. I was doing nothing else. And that kind of was my like gateway into woodworking. So next I went to Israel to do a student exchange during university. We all did Erasmus in my university. So I spent a year in Israel in the end. I was supposed to just do 1 semester, but I really enjoyed my time there. And that was also very eye-opening design-wise for me because there was a very different approach in Israel to designing than there was in my previous university. We were really encouraged to make functional objects, functional prototypes, use the workshop. There was this general energy of wanting to create something. You were allowed to rip down walls if you wanted to. Everyone was always just making something. If someone needed a chair, they would go and just make themselves a chair. which was really different to what I was used to. We were just making like visual prototypes in my university at home. So I spent my entire time in the workshop. I got really addicted to the workshop, and I just started off with wood. That was the one material I had started using now, and it just kind of caught me. I was deep into it. So this is probably one of the very first things I turned on a lathe, these stool legs. I was incredibly proud of myself that they turned out so even and all the same. And this was one of the products I designed together with someone else in the university. It was a stool that by tension you can kind of click in the legs. This was another project I did there that was quite difficult to do. I definitely had no idea what I was doing, but the concept was to have a chair that you could pull apart and it becomes a bench. So if you have a guest, you can offer them a chair, and it's kind of the whole like movement of sharing. Um, this was the first chair I ever built. Actually, the stool before I did after this, which was definitely a big project for someone not having done any carpentry before. It worked. It lasted for a while, but it definitely collapsed eventually. But that was it. I was now hooked. I was into woodworking. This was what I wanted to do. So I came back to my university in Germany. This is my bachelor project. It was now COVID, so we were not supposed to use the workshop of the university. Everyone else did like products in concept and then did renderings or maybe like a prototype. But I insisted that I wanted to make my project. I wanted to actually build it and test it out. That was a big part of the concept. So I created this table that was a whole dinner experience for strangers to share a meal. And this was again one of my first wood turning experiments. I turned this plate. I did some ceramics with a lot of help. All of these plates. Actually, not seen here is the whole cutlery from metal I also made, the table itself. So I insisted on creating this project in real life. By this time, I was graduating. I had met my now husband in Israel. He was one of the people to show me how to actually turn woods and probably turn one of my first bowls. He'd gotten a scholarship to go to Japan. So when I was graduating in my bachelor's, he was ready to go to Japan. I didn't really have a clear idea of what to do after graduating. So I was like, okay, I'll come, I'll join. Now it was COVID, so his journey was delayed. He didn't get a visa right away. And by the time that he went, I wasn't able to get a visa to go to Japan. So while I was waiting for the borders to open again, I decided in my hometown, I was living with my parents again for a while, to join a local carpentry. And I think I spent 4 months at the carpentry, and we were building kitchens from full wood linoleum. This is one of the kitchens. I didn't build a lot of these parts. I mainly was sanding and oiling things and doing little finishing cuts. But I definitely carried all of this up. I think this was the fifth floor. It was heavy. So one of the things I helped install. And that just really encouraged me to, yeah, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with wood. I hadn't fully decided in what direction yet. I don't think I knew what the possibilities really were. So carpentry kind of seemed the obvious way to go. But I just really enjoyed the physical work. So in the internship, I learned that sitting in front of a computer, it tired me out creatively and physically, and just lifting things, working with my body was just the right thing. And this carpentry had a lathe, so this is probably bowl number 3 and 4. Definitely my first 10 bowls that I ever made. I kind of taught myself after I mentioned, my now husband had shown me, I think, how to make 2 bowls in Israel. So now I was trying to teach myself. The carpentry was nice enough to buy me some tools. I think they bought me 2 bowl gouges if I was going to show them how to turn. So this was also my first teaching experiences ever. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was showing some other people how to turn. So these are some of the first things I did, and also some of the first things I posted on Instagram. and I got pretty good feedback for them. I actually sold two of these bowls, which I was really surprised. I didn't expect to. I wasn't making them to sell them, but there was a lot of interest. And I kind of started playing with the idea, oh, maybe I can sell some of these pieces. Maybe I can continue to make some things to sell. Now, I finally got my visa to Japan. I was really lucky. There was just about a 1 month period where they were handing out visas before they completely shut down for 2 years. So I came to Japan. I originally thought I wanted to work in a carpentry because that was the obvious way to work with the material wood for me. I was looking for a shrine or temple carpentry, and quickly noticed that that's a very hard route to go down. So you're expected to do a 4 year internship, apprenticeship. It'll be somewhere in the countryside, definitely not in Tokyo, which is where Ido was studying at the university now. And you'll start from zero. You'll be the lowest parts in in the hierarchy of the carpentry. So you'll sweep the floors for the first year. Hours are going to be incredibly hard, likely no weekends. If you want to learn anything, you'll have to stay after hours and try and imitate what you were seeing your teachers doing in the beginning. So while I wasn't put off so much by the hard work, I was by the amount of time it was going to take and by the fact that I had to move somewhere else. I was a bit hesitant. I thought maybe I can find a different thing to do. Maybe I can find a chair maker or some box maker, something else within Tokyo. While we were searching, I set up a small workshop in our house in Tokyo. This is my very first lathe. It's a very funny workshop to look back at. Um, and we were really lucky that we were living in a house that was supposed to be demolished, and our neighbors were working in like the metal industry, so there was a lot of noise around, and everyone was really fine with us creating dust and noise. So I started making at home. I wasn't really planning on this being a full-time job, but while I was studying Japanese to maybe find a place to learn and just searching also for teachers, I was just making. I wanted to do something. I obviously had a lot of time. So I was creating work from Tokyo for a year and a half. And it was also around that time that I got interested in urushi. I think I saw a YouTube video about urushi first in Germany. That was the first time I had really thought about it as a wood finish. And now that I was in Japan, I was noticing that it was much more than a wood finish and that there were so many possibilities to it. And I just kind of played around with it by myself. But then I found an evening school in Tokyo and I went, started studying there a little bit. And I was making some objects. These are some of the first things I was selling as well. We started Sentomono around that time because Ido decided he's doing ceramics to sell his work. I was going to sell my work. This was how we made some of our money in the beginning. I did a lot of carving at the time. This hollow form, I think, is my second hollow form ever. And possibly my last. I don't think I've done one since. I should probably get back to it. I quite enjoyed the process. But yeah, I was just making objects at home. And then I found a chair maker that I originally wanted to study with and convince him to take me in. But he saw some of what I was doing and he asked me why I don't study wood turning. It's like I didn't know studying wood turning is a thing. And he told me about the school in Yamanaka that has a wood turning school. And that Japanese wood turning is actually not the same as Western wood turning, which I wasn't aware of at all, and that I should go check it out. So I went to the open campus day with my husband. We drove all the way here. I think it's a 7 hour car drive. We were sleeping in the back of the car and we were having a look at the school. They did this whole open day where you can kind of look at different classes and get introduced to everything. And I just wanted to know what is even going on. And it looked intimidating. And I actually decided at the time I was not going to do this. I was not going to move 7 hours away from Tokyo while Ido still studied in Tokyo at university by myself in a class of 6 students, not really speaking Japanese in the countryside. Um, but then I came back here a second time to visit another foreigner who lives here. And she took me to meet all the local woodturners, and one of them offered to take me in and teach me before I even applied to the school. And everyone was incredibly kind and helpful. So I gave it a second chance and I actually applied. And this is my entrance picture. This is the first day of school. As you can see, I'm really standing out. There was one other foreigner at the school. There was a Taiwanese girl that had studied there before, but I was definitely like the foreign alien. Um, but everyone was really kind. They were really excited I wanted to do this. The application process went incredibly easy. I just said, I really want to do this. They were like, oh, great, that's amazing. So come and do this. You can see the director in the very front, the short older man who's sitting with us there. He's a National Living Treasure and he founded the school. And he, during my interview, was just giving me a presentation basically for an hour. I didn't know what he was saying, but he was just talking the whole time. And then it's like, okay, you're in. So I didn't know what was happening to me, but I was in the school. Um, I think I need to explain just a little bit uh, what is Japanese wood turning, because it's surprisingly different. I wasn't really aware. I mainly applied to the school because I wanted to learn about urushi. So I knew that we were going to do wood turning, but we were also going to learn how to lacquer, and we were going to learn how to make reinforced lacquer, soup bowls, all kinds of lacquering techniques. And that's what I really came to study. I thought I already kind of knew how to turn wood, so that wasn't really my focus. I mean, obviously, I wanted to turn wood that I then lacquered, because there's also lacquering schools only, but there you don't make the wooden base. So for me, it was always important to make the wooden parts that then I wanted to lacquer myself. And I came originally with the idea of, oh, okay, this is really scary, maybe I'll just stay for 6 months and then I can drop out. But I quickly learned that after 6 months, we had not lacquered anything yet. We just made blanks. um, so I ended up staying the whole 2 years. And I still think now that I know less than, well, every day you learn in Japan, you notice that you know less than you thought. But getting back to Japanese wood turning, so this is a Yamanaka style lathe. This is actually specifically to this little town. I think there is, I don't know how many people live here, but it's a really small mountain village. There's now about 250 woodturners here. 100 years ago, it was about over 700 woodturners. But this machine is only used in this town. It's not used anywhere else in Japan. Um, and it's directly translated from this machine. So up until I think 150 years ago, woodturners in Japan were still nomads. They would travel from forest to forest, cut down a tree where there was bowl orders, and then right on the spot make the bowls and sell them. And they would carry this machine with them. And then a lot of times the women would actually pull and the men would sit there and turn. And this was then directly translated into this machine. So you still have the forward and backward motion in both directions. You still sit on the side of the piece, and you still have the movable tool rest. So it's just a very instant translation of the way it was done back then. And because we're turning, let's see, because we're turning end grain bowls here, so this is if you have the two belts, you can see the belt system. We turn in both directions. So we turn in forward and reverse, because that allows us to turn end grain bowls very easily. And the belts are being pushed on. So these two levers that go towards the fronts, they have a thread that goes down, and then you have two foot pedals that push on either belt onto the machine. And that makes it turn in either direction. But that also gives you the ability to actually control the speed slightly of how you're turning. So we can change the motor speed itself, but we can also, because if you quickly push the belt on and off, then it slows down the machine while you're doing that. And that allows you really precise cuts when you're scraping. So we always listen to the sound that the cut makes. And as soon as you hear the slightest vibration, you will slow down the machine. And then once you get the cut again and you can hear and you can see that it cuts smoothly, you'll speed up the machine. So you constantly use this kind of speed control. But also we use hook tools. So these are quite similar to pole lathe tools that are used in Europe. Surprisingly similar. I've seen some of the tools that people use. It's the same kind of concept, and you turn below the center. So we have a movable tool rest that's not fixed in place, and these tools are really long, so the handle sits kind of under your armpit, and you pivot the tool. So you use the pivoting motion, which makes it really dangerous. There's a lot of mistakes in the beginning. For the whole first year of studying, we broke many, many tools. So you learn how to forge the tools yourself. You can't buy them anywhere. But there's been times where you like broke 3 tools a day and then you had to make 3 new ones. And we just basically walked between the forge and the turning room all day. And because it's so difficult to learn and it's also quite dangerous, like they're really flimsy hooks. The edge will break off quite easily. We use jam chuck, so the piece of wood will fly off quite easily. It takes a long time to learn. So for a whole, here's maybe a good picture just to kind of see the pivoting motion. Another aspect to mention is that because you're pivoting the tool, the bigger the piece gets, the increasingly more difficult and dangerous it gets because the tool is now way at a stronger angle and it really wants to pull you in. So turning pieces, I think this will probably be 30 centimeters, is already a really big challenge. So not something you can do early on. Whereas on a Western lathe, I find it not easy, but it's relatively similar, turning smaller, bigger pieces, because you always turn at the center. But on these Japanese lathes, it gets incredibly more difficult. But yeah, so the first year you can see like a nice catch I had here on the left. We just turned blanks for months. This is all the wood that was delivered, I think, just for maybe 2 months we were turning this. There were 6 students. So the whole school has 2 different courses. There's the beginner course and then there's a professional course. The beginner course is if you have no previous knowledge at all. So I joined that. There's 6 students there. And then the professional course usually has 2 students only. And if you do the professional, you have school twice a week, and the other 4 days of the week you're supposed to go and study with a local woodturner with a master, which quite a lot of people do. So even after 2 years of studying in the beginner course, you're considered still a beginner. You're still supposed to either spend 5 full years as an apprentice somewhere or do this professional course for another 2 years. But most people continue learning, so I'm still considered very, very beginner after my studies. But yeah, all we did for the whole first year was turn rice bowls, exactly the same shape. So hundreds of them. I don't know how many I did. This was the first ones we did. We turned blanks first. We then dried those blanks for a few months, and then we would turn the final shape from that. Once we had made, I think, about 200 blanks and we had turned the final bowls from this wood, I was really excited. I thought, okay, now we're going to lacquer these bowls. Turns out all of these bowls were made from practice woods. This was softwoods. And after these, we were going to make the real bowls from the real woods. So all of these were just firewoods. All of what we did, I don't know how many hundreds, were all just going to go straight to the trash. But yeah, I think something that I definitely learned in school more than anything was practice and patience, to a level that I would have never pushed myself to. So I'm really glad that the school made us spend this time. So here you can see some of the bowls finally turned. I think I finished 120. Obviously, there's a lot of pieces that break or a lot that just have mistakes. A lot of the beginning of the woods that were just thrown out. These are then the ones that we lacquered, and we started school in March. Term started in March, and we only lacquered by December. So my whole plan of potentially stopping my studies after 6 months did not add up. Um, but these all had to be exactly the same. We were learning to make precisely the same bowls. And even if you then managed to make them precisely the same, that wasn't really the goal. The goal was to make many a day. So there's this rumor that my director claims he can make, I think, 700 bowls a day, but we did the maths and I'm skeptical. But it's all about making them as quickly as possible. So they have to be precisely the same and they have to be really quick because the wood turners here are all production turners. So it's not about making one bowl and then thinking about the shape for the next bowl. It's all about creating production work and creating it quickly and at a really high quality. This is the director of the school. He's a national living treasure. So in Japan, there is this special title that you're being awarded by the government if you're it's I think in other parts of the world we often have this for monuments or special buildings, um, maybe even special objects, but in Japan they also have it for people that have a very specific skill, um, and that continue a traditional craft or something connected strongly to Japanese culture. Most people are not awarded this. I think the youngest people ever awarded this title was 60 or something. So you need to be very experienced to be given this, and it's a really high honor. So he is basically the wood turning god. So if he entered the room, he didn't teach us every day. Other teachers we had on a daily basis. His son was one of them, but he came in every week, at least once a day, just to kind of come and give us feedback. And if he entered the room, everyone jumped up, stopped whatever they were doing, got their notepads out, um, to the point that I was kind of thinking that people were overdoing it. So if he was sitting there looking like this, you would just offer him things that he could potentially need next, which I felt you were probably annoying him more than really being helpful. But everyone was like, "Oh, do you need a hammer? Do you need the scraper? Do you need some sandpaper?" And you would just like pass random things onto him, trying to be helpful. Um, but definitely a very strong impact, that he had. I unfortunately my Japanese when I entered school was not great, struggling a lot because it was a practical school. The actual practical part of making was quite easy to learn because I could observe how people were doing things. But the stories that he was telling, I had a hard time understanding, and I think I missed a lot of like valuable information. But some parts I understood. He was often telling us about his childhood, about the amounts of bears he's seen in the neighborhood, about him catching fish in the local river with his hands, like a lot of just stories of like the old days in Yamanaka. He is turning, I believe, 91 this year. He's still turning wood every day. His son and his grandson are working with him. You can see him swing a 2.5 kg hammer there, no problem. He's very fit. It's quite incredible to see. And a lot of my teachers, I think all of my teachers were over 60. A lot of them were 80 years old. Many of them started turning when they were 12 or 15. So incredible amounts of experience and time spent wood turning. A little bit about like the life in school. So it was quite a familiar place. I felt really welcome, although it was very lonely at times as well. We had tea time twice a day as well as lunch break, and I was sitting there for most of the time, just not really understanding what's being said. So while I was able to learn really quickly, like everyday Japanese and what I need to express the absolute basics, and even the wood turning vocabulary, actually understanding stories or being able to interact, to tell a story, telling a joke, making friends was really difficult, and it's I'm still struggling. So it was definitely not easy 2 years, but at the same time I felt really welcome, really encouraged, and everyone was incredibly helpful. I'm quite glad that I was there studying this. So I almost felt like my teachers were proud that someone from so far away wanted to come and learn this particular craft that is also struggling in Japan. So we had a lot of barbecue parties, a lot of sake was being being had, uh, birthday parties for the director. We all drove to this was a wood shop that we drove, I think, for 4 or 5 hours to, just to buy some small pieces of wood. So generally a really welcoming kind of environment. But yeah, it was hard. Japanese people are also, it takes a long time to make friends, so it was some lonely times as well. But the town itself is all about wood turning, so everyone here is somehow involved in lacquering or turning. This is a festival that's being held every year where we actually carry a massive lacquered wooden bowl through the town, go from shop to shop. They sell all, like, this whole street has lacquerware shops where they sell the local lacquerware. It's all about craft. Everyone here, if you walk through the street, you can hear the wood turning sounds, like the cutting, buzzing, almost at every other building. So it's also quite lively. There's a lot going on, very strong community of people. Everyone always asks each other for advice. They're all working together. It's quite a nice place to be. I think just to quickly mention urushi, we were making traditional lacquerware, so that was the whole point of what we were turning, was to lacquer it afterwards, which also means there was a lot of rules of what we were making. So as I mentioned, the whole first year we were just doing one soup bowl. That was it. No other shape at all. That was all we were doing for the first year. And then in the second year, we were asked to make plates for sweets that were being served in tea ceremony and a box for sweets that were being served in tea ceremony. So that was the two objects that we had to design, but there was a lot of limitations. So the size was limited, the way the foot had to look so that you can. So in tea ceremony, everything's about how the object's being handled, and you don't really lift the object, you kind of like push it over the tatami mat. So the foot had to have a really specific design that you can easily push it. The lid had to be a specific design that you can open it with as graceful a hand movement as possible. So we were making all these really specific objects that are really traditional, and they're all lacquered traditionally. So this is some pictures of the lacquering room. This is one technique that we were learning pretty intensely, which is fuki urushi, where we apply this lacquer and we wipe it off. But just to quickly explain what urushi even is, because I know there's going to be questions. Urushi is a lacquer that comes from the urushi tree. And we actually gathered our own urushi. We have some trees. The school has trees that we were harvesting. And it's the tree sap itself that you're collecting. So you cut the tree, and then the sap that comes out you collect, and you can use it just filtered from impurities, straight like that. You can use it, or it's often being mixed with different pigments. You can heat treat it to get it a little bit more transparent. There's all kinds of things you can do with it. But what's special about the lacquer is that it's incredibly strong. It's not just completely waterproof, it's also alkali, acid resistant, antibacterial, but it doesn't just dry. So it has to cure in a humid and warm environment, because these trees come from a place that is really, really humid. So only in the contact with the water contents in the air does it actually cure and create hard film. So you need special curing cabinets, and you need a controlled humid environment. And then each layer that you apply takes a couple of days to dry as well. Getting the lacquer itself is also really hard work. So one tree only makes about 200 grams of lacquer in its lifespan before you have to cut the tree. And then you can coppice it, so the root system stays alive, and you'll get a new tree growing from the same root system. But the tree itself dies, and it takes another 10 years to grow a new tree. Also, like, there's a lot of specifics about the season that you can harvest in. You only get a few grams every week. You have to wait every few, like you can see these lines. You need to increasingly take more, otherwise the tree gets tired too quickly. So it's a whole process of getting this lacquer, and it's really highly valued. And then there's all kinds of techniques of how you can use it. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I quickly wanted to mention that we also learned how to make soup bowls. And I think people don't really know about this so much in the West, but I find it really fascinating. is that the Japanese bowls are turned really, really thinly, like millimeter thick, because they're held in your hands. So we are used to heavy bowls on the table, and then you eat maybe with a spoon or something. But the Japanese take the bowls and hold them up the whole time that they're eating, then eat with the chopsticks. So they have to have a specific design that is comfortable to hold, but they also have to be really lightweight, that it's not too heavy. So you turn them really thinly, but then you reinforce the bowl with fabric so it doesn't crack. Because even with just lacquer on wood that makes it waterproof, the wood itself isn't completely heat resistant. So if you put hot soup in it every day, it might still crack. So we learned the whole process of reinforcing that wood with fabric and then various layers of urushi lacquer and clay powders, which I think it takes at least 25 steps to actually make a soup bowl. But you then get this incredibly strong product, which is kind of like insulating as well. So the outside of the bowl stays cold when the inside's hot. And it's a really, really thin bowl that won't crack. But you end up having these really black, shiny bowls that look like plastic. It's quite hard to differentiate if it's a plastic or a natural lacquerware bowl. But these are from the first year we learned to actually reinforce these bowls and lacquer them black. And it took us a whole year to make the whole process of creating soup bowls. These are the curing cabinets. This was something else that we did as well. So there's all kinds of like decorating techniques with urushi. This is a really cool one that I enjoy, is where you put eggshell one by one on the urushi surface, and then you lacquer it and sand it down to get a completely smooth surface, and you get these designs with eggshell. There's all kinds of ones with golds and silver powders, pearl inlay, going into detail, but a lot of fascinating things. I think the more I learn about urushi, the less I find out I really know about the material. These are some objects that I mentioned. So this is the sweets plate and the sweets box that I was making in the second year of school. These were then like my graduation pieces. Lacquered. Yeah, as I mentioned, there was like we were allowed to design this piece, but there were so many limitations that they all pretty much end up looking the same. So we were not really encouraged to come up with our own designs. It's very much learning how the object is handled, always thinking about how it keeps in the hand, how it's to drink from it, how to like hold it, how it feels, the weight. That was way more important than it was how the object actually looked. This is my workshop now. So I graduated school last year. I'm renting a workshop at the moment. This is what a traditional Japanese woodworking, wood turning workshop often looks like. So I have the lathe. In a lot of places, the lathe is kind of set on floor level, and then I actually sit under floor level, which is kind of funny. So you have to pretty much crawl into there. These are like some of my hook tools. And these are pieces I made since. So this piece I made actually during my time in the university in the school. And I submitted this to an urushi competition and won a prize at the time, which I was really, really happy. I think it was a huge honor, but maybe to kind of explain how the hierarchies work here, it was at the same time something where I felt like I might have upset my teachers because I was still a student at the school. So there's always this consideration of I'm not supposed to be doing competitions yet because I'm not good enough in the sense of like the learning hierarchy. So I, as like a foreigner, was thinking, oh, it's probably great if I win a prize. I mean, that must be amazing. My teachers are going to be happy about me. But then as soon as I actually won the prize, it's like, oh, I might have actually upset more people by doing this than it did any good. I think I'm getting a lot of bonus points for being a foreigner, so people expect that I don't understand the rules and that I will be making mistakes. But there is always this kind of consideration of whose feet you might be stepping on. Now that I graduated, I always have to think about who I'm going to ask for advice, because there's a hierarchy within the teachers as well. There's the oldest person, and there's the National Living Treasure obviously is the highest up, so his son will then be a bit higher than the other teachers. So there's this whole level of who is a little bit more important and experienced than the next person. Who do I ask for advice? If I ask this person, then is this person going to be upset? So there's whole, yeah. I won't be going too much into the Japanese way of studying. But these are some other pieces I made, I think, during my studies and my private time. And then I started experimenting a bit. So I was kind of trying to think about what kind of objects it is I am making now and what influences me. And I don't think about that too much. I don't really think about before I'm making an object what it is I want to make and what the concept of the product is. But I'm much more intuitively, I usually just find a nice piece of wood that I like and I just turn away, and then while I'm doing it, develop the shape and just kind of like to work with the wood. So if I see, oh, there's a crack here that I find interesting, then I'll try and just kind of work the shape around it to have that in there. Or yeah, just kind of work with the piece of wood. I don't really sketch pieces before I make them. So I can still see that this is heavily influenced by Japanese tea objects. There's a specific box that you use for a tea ceremony, and they often have like a lid that's a bit rougher. And I had this branch flying around that I found at the beach, and I just kind of thought it would be nice to apply it there. But my teachers then always give me the feedback that my objects look really Western. So I think it's a funny mix of me thinking I'm making.
Rabea, I don't know if you can hear me, but we can't hear you. I don't know if something, maybe a mute button got hit by mistake or something. It was just like all of a sudden we couldn't hear you, although I don't see that your microphone is muted. Yeah, it looks like that several of us are experiencing the no sound. Let's see. Well, you left us with a couple of really beautiful works that we can admire while hopefully we get the audio situated. Yeah, it looks like everybody's chiming in, no audio. Hmm. And you've tried your on and off, you've hit mute and yeah. Hmm. Let's see. Um, yeah, Zakari, I agree. Beautiful objects to expect in the meantime. I wonder if maybe you could try your settings. I don't know why that would affect things, but because it was working so well before this.
No.
Oh,
Oh
there you
yeah.
go. There you go. Yeah.
Okay, there we
Okay.
go. I think it
Okay.
switched the input somehow. All right.
Yeah, computers have a mind of their own sometimes. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna mute
Okay.
myself and let you take over.
Just let me know where I stopped talking for you, so I'm not
Maybe
missing too
go
much.
if you could go back to the previous slide. I think
Okay.
that was when it happened.
Uh, s- Here.
Yep,
All
there
right.
we go. You were telling us how you think it looks Japanese, but your instructors think it looks Western.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I said about this piece is that yeah, well, I can see that I'm really quite influenced by like Japanese shapes that no matter what I do, like my teachers still really see that it's very Western. So there's always kind of that. I think I'll never really break free of that aspect, and that Japanese people will always see that I come from a bit different backgrounds, and I'm not really trying to fight it, but yeah, I guess I'm making kind of a mix of work. Yeah, and then I mentioned that I came back to carving quite a bit. So while I spent 2 years in school doing just wood turning and lacquering, that was all I was doing. I kind of discovered carving pieces that I'm turning again. So um, I noticed making this presentation that my like this is work I did 4 years ago, and I've kind of come back to this now, which I thought was quite interesting. That I can really see the resemblance of how now I'm creating work like that. That again, I was kind of trying to figure out what it is, what my design language is now, and where I'm trying to go with my work at the moment. And I'm not quite sure I figured that out. So uh, I do just naturally really enjoy these kind of natural shapes, flowery shapes, but then I also really enjoy using pieces that are really simple. And I really, with each piece, I like to work with the wood. So I always first look at what the wood has to offer and then how I can work with that. I don't really like to have an idea and then just make that happen with a piece of wood. So I think there's always a conversation that I try to have with the piece. And yeah, so now I'm at a point where I'm trying to kind of figure out what it is that I've learned in Japan and all the influence that it had on my work and try and come back to what I've previously naturally done and the shapes that are more intuitively my own. And this is where I am in my work now. I think I spend a lot of time talking, but yeah, let's see what your questions are, and I'm excited to answer any more input that you might have.
Great. Well, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. It's so exciting to hear your journey. And one thing that I really appreciated is your sort of natural curiosity, sort of insatiable curiosity, as well as your fortitude to charge forward and gain this knowledge. Although in interesting, what some could seem as really intimidating circumstances. So I really admire that bravery and grit and just doing it. That's awesome. So one of the
Thank you.
questions we do have is there's a lot of comments in the chat, and I know that as a presenter, it's difficult to read all of that and present. So everybody's just very complimentary and have really and I think they also really appreciated that little pause where we had some audio difficulties because they had a chance to savor your work a little longer.
Sorry that happened. I don't know. I think my laptop is just like, oh, we'll use a different microphone now.
That happens. Mine does that kind of crazy stuff all the time. But we do have a question from Sally Ashcroft, and she wants to know how are you holding the pieces that are being carved
Mm.
while you're carving them?
Yeah, I didn't go too much into the jam chucks. So we use jam chucks, which there's basically two types. One is a nail chuck. So it's just a piece of wood that we literally hammer in nails, usually about six of them, and then we file them to a point. And then we just attach a piece of wood to that. That's how you do the outside. So it's just sitting on a couple of nails. And then to do the inside, we actually do a bowl chuck. So it just follows the shape of the outside of the bowl and you just kind of jam it. And that has both good and bad parts for it. So for production turning, if each piece is exactly the same, then they will all fit in there. But as soon as you want to make like a different shape each time, you have to make a new chuck for every single piece that you're making. So it really becomes kind of not sensible. But because the bowl sits inside of this second bowl, it really reduces vibrations and the whole piece is supported and it allows you to make these incredibly thin bowls, but you also don't see the outside shape. So we usually make a little piece of wood that I'm not sure what you would call that, that like shows us exactly the shape that we want to turn, and we keep checking that the inside has the right shape so we don't accidentally go and turn a hole through the piece. But that's basically the two kind of chucks that we use.
So are you using like carving gouges or do you use burrs?
Um, the hook tools are kind of, they don't have a burr, but it's just a fine like chisel kind of edge. But they're used usually at like an angle. I think I showed a picture before that it's quite a sharp point, and then you cut with the point of the tool. And then the scrapers you cut with a burr. Yeah.
Oh, I guess I would didn't ask my question. I meant like the facets that you're carving on and like those lovely petal shapes.
Ah, like the final carving.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, chisels. Yeah, I use hand chisels. So after I turn the shape, I will then um take it off, maybe put it in the vise, and I'll just use hand chisels to usually gouges. Yeah.
Let's see. This is just a comment, which it's a nice comment. It's from Karen, who says your scarf in the portrait resembles the eggshell lacquer finish.
Nice.
Let's see. We have a question from Kim Wamsley who asks, I'm curious about how your work was perceived to be Western and how different from Japanese.
It's kind of hard to grasp it, so it can be a bit frustrating, especially if I'm trying to make something actually Japanese. So let's say I've been trying to make a rice bowl for functional wear, then I definitely notice as an outsider, I get a lot more criticism for it than a Japanese person would. So I can see people here making quite modern shapes and getting away with it. But then when I do it, there'll be a lot of feedback of, oh, the foot is slightly too small. It's not like comfortable enough in the hand, or the shape of wall is not 6 centimeters, it's 6.5, and it's a bit too tall. And you'll get all of these kind of criticisms that I think as a foreigner you'll get a lot more of. It's not necessarily done in like a bad spirit, but I think they're more trying to help you understand, as you didn't grow up naturally with this background, why the Japanese shape is the way it is. But I think my teachers can't really even explain it. I've asked before, like, why do you think this is Western? Like, oh, it just has this, they call it like the Rabea roundness or something. And like my objects tend to be really round and I have like these natural curves that I think are just not really seen here. I just do them intuitively. I don't think about it, but I don't think they can particularly point it out either. But because Japan has so many traditional shapes where it's like each bowl shape has a name and each object has a specific function, as soon as you make just the slightest change to the radius, it'll be conceived differently.
Right. I'm guessing there's just like really subtle nuances that if you've grown up in that tradition, then you can pick up on them, but it's
Yeah,
difficult probably for the Western eye who may not be as fluent with those details and subtleties. Hey,
yeah.
Rabia, can I ask you if you have the ability to stop the screen share from your side? I tried to do it from my
Ah,
side,
I
but
didn't.
it's not working.
Sorry. Of
There we go. Okay,
course.
great. Oh, much better. Good. So now we can see each other better. Okay, so we have a few more questions. Let's see. Tony Pirelli says, awesome work and thanks for sharing. Those scrapers useful on Western, are the scrapers useful on Western lathes as well? And he asks if they're easy to use.
Um, there's two kinds of scrapers that we use. So there's the scrapers that have the same kind of long handle and they're also pivoted. So you can use them on a Western lathe, but I find it kind of scary because the tool rest is fixed in place. So mine is loose. So if I have a catch, I have space to go somewhere. Whereas if I had this metal bar getting stuck between the like metal tool wrist and the piece, I'd be a bit more worried about it. But you can use them. You just need to know that they're being used underneath the center. And then there's the handheld scrapers that we use. So these are made from old hacksaw blades, and that's the final finish. And they really create like the final perfect smooth surface. And those you can definitely use on a Western lathe. I actually think they're really, really good to be used on a Western lathe. I sent Glenn Lucas some last year, and he's been using them for a while. So those are definitely useful. Yeah.
Great. And he asked the same, Tony also asks, are they useful for end grain only or side grain too?
No, both. The scrapers are used for both. If we also turn side grain on these machines, but then we use different hook tools, so the hooks themselves look different, but the scrapers are the same.
Okay. Let's see here. Gregory Lease asks, what are the most common native Japanese hardwoods used in traditional wood turning? And how relatively hard are they compared to European or North American hardwoods?
So traditionally we use three wood species, which is keaki, which I believe in English is seikova. It's a very Japanese wood that doesn't grow anywhere else. That's used most of the time. So all of the pieces that have this very orange lacquer finish with the very visible grain, that's all keaki, which grows, it's a hardwood, I would say similar to walnuts, maybe. Not incredibly hard, but definitely harder on the harder side. And it grows really big, it grows really straight, and it has this really distinct grain, and it doesn't really change shape when it's drying, so it's used a lot. Then there's chestnut that's being used, which there's not many trees left, so now it's kind of gone pretty expensive. But that used to be because it's softer, but you have more curliness in it, more unevenness, so it tends to move more. It's not as stable in a soup bowl. And there's something called Japanese cherry birch, which is a kind of birch that's also, yeah, it's like similar to birch hardness. Um, that doesn't have that distinct grain, so it's used a lot for pieces that are completely lacquered because it's not as beautiful on its own. But those are the three pieces used, three woods used.
We have another great question. Thanks, everybody, all of the attendees for sending us your question. It makes for a really great conversation. But Sophie Park has a question. She says, thanks for the fantastic presentation. And it sounds like you found a very special sense of community through learning about woodworking in Japan, even though it could also be an isolating experience. Do you think that working as a craftsman in Japan, in a Japanese context, is particularly unique in how central it is to communities like Yamanaka? And have you noticed something similar in Western contexts?
I do think it's very unique. So Japan is really split up in regions that are famous for one particular craft. So you'll really find this town famous for this specific kind of ceramics. This town is famous for making tea caddies only. So it's very split up. And then those places really go very deeply into the knowledge and the specification of making that specific thing, which I also believe helps raise quality and like the technical knowledge because you don't venture off so much. So you really focus on this one particular thing and then you pass on that knowledge. And because the people are all in the same place, Yamanaka has such incredible knowledge and it's all being passed on in this one place that it's being more preserved than I think it would be if it was just people all over the country. And there is a strong sense of community around it as well. Everyone's kind of depending on the craft, so there's a big understanding. Everyone's life is completely circled around the craft. So it has something very special to it that I've not experienced in other places of the world. I think Europe used to have this, but it just has died out. I know that Germany used to have places particularly for glasswork or for jewelry, for goldsmithing, but it's just kind of died out. So I think it's very particular to Japan nowadays.
Yeah, I think the guild system has evolved and changed and, like you say, died out. And it is pretty special that it remains there in Japan. And it's such an important heritage, I think, to preserve,
Mm.
you know, and I think it's great that they welcomed you in to learn these techniques and that you're now part of that story of, continuing, you're part of the legacy of these traditions. And I think That's really special. So, in your time there in Yamanaka, did you notice if there are a lot of women woodturners in Japan in
Ah,
general?
yeah, so recently, yes. None of the teachers are women, none of the like old masters are. But there's definitely been a recent change that all the students at the moment are women, all the apprentices are. So I think in the next 20 years, they'll really change the way things are done here. Now it's really welcome. So I didn't notice any kind of hesitation to take in women, but I think it's more because no one else is interested. So the school that I studied at was created for people who finished high school to directly go into the craft. And it was supposed to take away some of that pressure on the teachers to teach their students all of this without really them being like helpful workers yet. So they're supposed to do the 2 years in the school, learn the basics, and then go and learn with their master and continue working, actually being able to be an active participant, but it's become really unpopular. There was definitely a huge decline. And now all the people, the school still has 6 students most years, so they're not having too little applications. But the people that apply now usually come from somewhere else. So with me, there was a woman who was 45 who did IT before, and she now decided she wanted to do woodturning. There was a 62-year-old a year above me who came to study woodturning now and like start over. So it's a lot of people that changed careers, or people in their 20s that did design or studied craft at university and then came. And my year, we were six, 5 women. The year after me was 6 and 5 women. So it's a lot of women who do it now.
That's great. Do you see like your work after the apprenticeship, after that program, and you come back to wood turning and you're starting to really insert your own aesthetic and interest, do you find that there's a visual distinction between women's work and the men's wood turning? Do you find that there's any difference?
I've heard my teachers say that, but I don't. So there's one teacher here who I'm quite influenced by who makes very, what I would call a feminine shape, if there even is such a thing, like very kind of elegant, very round, flowery shapes. And he's a man, and I think I make work quite similar to that. But then my teachers have told me that I make very like women objects. So I don't actually see a difference. There are some women that I've seen that make really kind of like edgy and kind of more like aggressive looking work. I don't see a difference in that. I might see a difference in the way they're turning. So I don't think this is a general thing, but I can tell from what I've seen in the school, from the students and from the teachers, that the men tend to be much more into the technical way of turning and really into like doing it quickly, getting bigger cuts, and really interested in sharpening the tools sharper. And the women are more about the shape. But that's a really big generalization that I'm not sure also applies to everyone.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's see, we have a question from Stephen Gray. He asks, are you selling most of your work and are you selling retail, he says on the street, and are you considered non-traditional in your community? And are you selling to the typical Japanese customer or primarily to a foreign buyer?
Yeah, so I sell online. We have an online shop that I mostly sell in, and 90% to foreign, to like international buyers. I've had some exhibitions in Japan, which is I'm surprised at like how welcome I've been to do these, but much more on the background of, oh, look, this foreigner is doing something Japanese. Like that's the fascination, much more than, oh, this work is like Japanese. So I think I get some bonus points for being a foreigner making Japanese work, but then at the same time, I'll never be accepted as making Japanese lacquerware. So there's both good and bad to it. I've come to terms with it because I know I don't want to make traditional Japanese lacquerware. Anyway, I want to be a bit more free. I want to create kind of my own shapes. So I'm okay with that outsider status. But it's definitely harder to sell in Japan because there's so much competition. So many people here do craft and so cheaply that it's harder to sell here. It's easier for me to sell abroad. Um, yeah, and the prices now, the yen is so weak, it's honestly also just not worth it so much selling inside of Japan. Yeah.
So how are you staying connected to the greater woodturning community now that you've graduated? And where do you see your interest taking you next?
I think I've really been out of touch with like the worldwide woodturning community for a long time. I only started after graduation to kind of look into that world more. I also don't know how to turn on a Western lathe anymore. I've not used one in 3 years, and a lot of people ask me if I want to come turn somewhere in America, and I'm like, I don't know how to use your machines. I'm not a teacher for this kind of. So I'm really doing only Japanese wood turning at the moment. That's what I really know how to do. But I do see a big potential in mixing the two. I do still have my Western lathe here, and I want to like get it out of the box again and try and put jam chucks on the Western lathe. I use vacuum chucks a lot also, which I think there's a big potential to using on the Western lathe. Some of the tools, I think I want to start using ring tools maybe on the Japanese lathe. So I think there's things where there's a big potential to kind of mix between the two, but I do see myself continuing mainly on the Japanese machine because I'm just so used to it now.
Let's see, we have another question. It's about, have you and your husband done any joint projects with ceramic and wood?
We get this question a lot, and no. So, we are thinking about some projects now, but in general, I'm maybe like a materialist purist. So if there's no real advantage to mixing the two materials, I don't see the point. Like,
We've done things that not to wood and ceramics, but like I make plates and then paint on them.
yeah, so we've done work where he's sitting behind and he mentioned he's done plates from ceramics and then I painted on them because I'm a bit better at illustrating, I guess. um and we work together every day just like creatively exchanging. We have a website where we also sell young Japanese artists' work because we think there's a huge market internationally. And a lot of Japanese artists struggle selling themselves abroad, and we really want to help them. So we're not just selling our own work. We do a lot of creative work together, yeah, bouncing back ideas, but mixing ceramic and wood we haven't done.
Ceramics and lacquer.
Maybe that's why you have such a great marriage. You don't have
Yeah,
to
I also think
negotiate those.
collaborating might not be the best idea.
That's great. Let's see. So well, I know that timing it's getting close to 7:20 my time, which I don't even know what time it is where you are. It's in the morning, I think.
10:20.
Okay. So we'll just do maybe one or two more last questions. We had a question that somebody was asking about that really lovely little picture, how you managed to do the spout.
Mm. So I turned the outside piece with everything having the spout shape. So I would make up to like the spout and turn the spout shape all around. And then turning it around, I would do the insides just to the level of where I wanted the inside to end. And then the rest I used on the belt sander. Just got rid of the material, carved the spout out, like the little details, and that's it.
You did it so well. You can't tell at all that, you blended in those lines and the wall thickness perfectly. So you
Thank
had
you.
you had mentioned in your slides a couple of the last pieces that you showed, like there was a blonde bowl that had these really beautiful petals and there's kind of a really elegant facet around the rim and it kind of got thin and then came down to the bottom of the foot, which was really elegant. I also love how your carving patterns radiate out from like the swollen portion of that blossom. So that attention to detail really elevates the work and to such a special, beautiful object. So congratulations on that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
But you said that maybe you're still I would imagine there's a decompression period from this intense apprentice experience where you are required to make, like it's about producing these same shapes that become embedded in your subconscious in many ways. And you just kind of go and make these things and make these things and make these things that I can imagine it would be quite a dramatic shift to now you make what you want to make. And so it sounded like you're still finding your balance in that, you know, and your style and aesthetic. And I appreciate hearing that. And I'm super excited to see where it goes. And, you know, when you do find your balance, what it's going to look like, because what you're already making is pretty spectacular.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely hard to break free. I'm definitely brainwashed in the shapes. I can tell sometimes, and like I've now learned what a Japanese like foots, these foots of the rice bowls, what it's supposed to look like. So I can't really imagine a bowl without a foot anymore. Like really trying to break free of that again and figuring out, yeah, my creativity again. Because it was 2 years of just patience and technique, which I'm really glad because I would have never pushed myself that far if I hadn't done the school. And I've gotten to a technique level that I wouldn't have got to otherwise. But now it's kind of nurturing that creative muscle again that was definitely suppressed. It was not about creativity in the school.
Yeah, but I think your background, like as an industrial designer and paying attention to these small little details, you know, the things that a lot of us may overlook, but add functionality and or take the mundane into something that's just elevated and beautiful. And so I can see that in those pieces, those last pieces that you showed, post apprenticeship. And it's really exciting. And I just love those little details and just juicy poetic moments. They're terrific. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think we are about out of time. We've got several compliments and comments. Thank you for spending your morning with us and sharing a fascinating journey. I know for myself, that was really inspiring. I think the work is inspiring, but also the lifestyle and your gumption to go out and do it and just learn all you can learn is really fascinating and inspiring. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you spending this time with us. And we can't wait until we get to meet again.
Thank you so much.